Okay?
Yeah,
So,
okay.
if you would be so kind as to say your first and last name and spell your last name, please.
Okay. Thomas F. Becher. Becherer.
And what year were you born?
1926.
Okay. Where was home before you became part of the military?
St. Louis, Missouri, North St. Louis.
Okay. I understand that you entered the Marine Corps,
Yes, sir.
and that was in what year?
January 1945.
Okay. And then you went to basic training at,
Paris Island, South Carolina.
and then after that, was there any type of specialized?
Well, if you want to call it that, from there you went to, mostly if you went to the West Coast, Camp Pendleton, for further infantry training, and then you were
deployed. Now,
right?
when you were deployed, I'm assuming the war was still going on?
The war was still going on, and Okinawa, the island of Okinawa, had just been secured. Of course, I was out of advanced infantry then, and was ready then for the invasion of Japan proper, when President Truman dropped the bomb. And
So you were deployed though to Asia.
well, there's a staging area in Australia.
Okay.
And that's where all the divisions were going to be deployed. The Marine Corps at that time, am I answering your question correct? The Marine Corps at that time had 6 divisions.
Okay.
And of course the Army was bigger than the Marine Corps. And then the war in Europe was over.
Correct.
And they were going to deploy all the troops from Europe over to the Pacific and make that big invasion on the mainland of Japan when Truman dropped the bomb. And of course there was a big stink at that time, because the guys that were in Europe were saying, hey, we won our war, why in the hell do we have to go over there? But it was going to be, the way I'm told, is that the invasion of Japan was going to be so big it would make Normandy, which was the biggest amphibious landing at that time, look like a cakewalk. Because at that time, and I didn't know that at the time, Japan had never been invaded. No foreign troops had ever entered in the mainland of Japan. And they had, you know how the Japanese were at that time, they were fanatics. And they had told us, as the little troopers, that be prepared to kill women and children, because they would be armed with spears, all kinds of nonsense.
Because now that's what had happened on Okinawa, correct?
Oh, yes.
Civilians had, or what we perceived to be civilians had attacked our troops.
Some of them, not all of them, but some of them did.
Some of them had actually committed suicide as to not be.
Yeah, right. And of course, at that time, the Japanese were so fanatic, especially on the islands, Iwo Jima and Okinawa and whatnot. And that was one of the factors that made Truman make that decision, the fact that the losses on Okinawa were so hideous that that's when he decided that we got to bring this thing to a close. And the American people were tired of war. We had 4 years of war and whatnot. And it's a godsend, because from what I've been told, that invasion of the mainland of Japan would have been about 1 million casualties. And we were going to have, the Marine Corps was going to have 6 divisions make the invasion. I don't know how many Army divisions were going to make it. The paratroopers were going to drop. It was going to be a big shindig, So, with the grace of God, Truman dropped that bomb, and there's people today think it was a bad deal, but for a little guy like me, I think it was a pretty good deal.
Now, since you were not sent to Japan, what happened to you then from Australia?
Well, we did go to Japan to disarm them and whatnot, and anybody that didn't turn in their arms, if they had any, they would be shot on sight. Well, we were there, Marine Corps was, the 1st Marine Division, my division, was only there for a short period of time, and then we were sent to China. The whole division went to North China.
Now, when you say North China, do you mean Peking or do you mean Manchuria?
No, it was it wasn't Peking, it was Tenzin. I don't know what they call it today now, but it was Tenzin, North China. And we were there, and of course, you know, we didn't know anything about communism or anything like that, but we knew there was a civil war.
Yeah, so the Civil War then probably started as soon as the Japanese surrendered, and that would be the nationalist forces under Chiang and the communist forces under Mao.
Yeah, and of course the thing is, Mao and Chiang Kai-shek united to fight the Japanese on the mainland, but then as soon as the war was over, why, Mao went his way and Chiang Kai-shek went his way. I got some pictures of the old devil in the book there, Andy will find it, and we were there and we were told, we didn't know anything about communism or anything. We were told they were bandits because the black market was really going strong, you know, because China had been occupied by the Japanese for 10 years then. And, you know, they'd steal anything. You'd steal your glasses off your face. And so we had to guard different installations there in China that was American property and stuff like that. Ride the trains because they were trying to bring equipment, food mainly, and coal to the populace, you know. So we rode the trains and guarded the material that they were carrying and whatnot like that. So it was strictly guard duty and whatnot. And
so how long were you in northern China?
well, we were in northern China, I'm guessing now, I can't remember exactly, maybe 9 months. And
So
then
about a year.
about a year, and then things really, they wanted us out, you know, the communists did. So we moved down to the very south part of China, right on the Yellow Sea, called a little town, well, it wasn't such a little town, but I don't know what they call it today, but it was Tsingtao.
Okay.
Tsington or something like that. And that's where we stayed until we got run out, you know, or at least they called them back to the States, you know. And then the 1st Marine Division, when they got back to the States, they went to Camp Pendleton, and that's where they are yet today.
So after you left China, your next stop would have been where?
Camp Pendleton.
Camp Pendleton, and you stayed there until?
Well, I stayed there, I can't remember exactly how long, and then got transferred down to San Diego to a outfit they called TTU, Troop Training Unit. It was a small detachment. I think they had, well, we had a brigadier general as commanding officer and then a lot of other brass, and I guess we had maybe 100, 125 enlisted, and each part of their specific MOS was there for training. We trained, well, we trained the 1st Marine Division, actually, or any Marines at the big island in San Diego, or outside of San Diego, was San Clemente, and how many invasions were made there and trained. Then we went up to an Army base, Fort Leonard Wood, not Fort Leonard Wood, Fort Lewis, Washington, and that was the 2nd Infantry Division, if I recall. They called themselves the Indian Heads, and they had never made an amphibious landing, and so we were training them, every aspect of the Marine Corps as a unit in an invasion. We're training those people. Is that thing running?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
it's been running ever since I sat down.
Okay.
I just want to make. I just
Well,
wanted to check.
am I doing
Oh, you're doing great.
okay?
You're doing great.
So I was in that outfit there until my discharge,
And that was in what year, do you remember?
that was in 1948.
So you got out just before Korea.
Yes.
But now, I know a lot of veterans were called back into the service when Korea started.
Yeah. I was discharged at Great Lakes. And of course, the thing is that after 4 years of war, and a terrible war, why, we all thought there won't be any more wars. This is the last of wars, period. Well, anyhow, when I got discharged at Great Lakes, there was a guy out there say, would you want to join the reserves and what have you? And I said, oh yeah. So I signed up for the reserves, okay? And so when I got home, in St. Louis, they had the 3rd Infantry Battalion, which was an active battalion down there. So I had nothing better to do, so I joined the 3rd Infantry down there on Ferry Street. And another good friend of mine, he also joined, and I talked my best buddy, who was never in service, to join, never thinking that
There would be another war.
So then I took advantage of the GI Bill and enrolled up at the University of Missouri. But I took what they call a 3B reserve status. No meetings, no pay, nothing, just that. And in fact, my enlistment ran out when I was up at the university, drove all the way over to Jeff City to up it. And so I was working at that summer, home from school, up in South St. Paul, Minnesota, on a construction gang. And I was corresponding with my buddy Paul Wilson, who was down at Quantico, Virginia, going through platoon leader school. And he says, and then the North Koreans crossed over the parallel in June of 50.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I think before this thing is all over, why, they're going to call up the 3B reserves, And I thought, oh, for the love of Pete. So anyhow, the Marine Corps at that time, and after World War II, everything went down the sewer. It was just disastrous, and they cut the appropriations for the Marine Corps, down to the nubbins. Only had 2 divisions, the 1st Division, my old division, and the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune. And so the beginning, right after the invasion of the North Koreans, naturally the Marine Corps was going to get in it, but they were down to only 70,000, as memory serves me, when they made the trip over there to Korea. And I had served with the Colonel Craig, who took over, they called it a brigade then, and that was the 5th Marines, a regiment of the 1st Marine Division, reinforced, that made that initial invasion or landing in Korea. And they went through that whole Seoul operation and whatnot pretty well.
At Incheon?
No, that's before Incheon.
Okay.
Yeah, and made that, and then they made pretty good strides through, liberated, along with Army units, Seoul and whatnot, and kind of had a pretty good, they were relieving the people that at the Pusan perimeter, when the American forces were pulled back or pushed back so far by the North Koreans, they classified it as the Pusan perimeter. And Pusan is right at the very tip of South Korea. And so it was a pretty iffy situation. So when...
But now you're still back in the United States.
I'm still back. And I did get the orders. My mother called up in St. Paul and she said, I have a registered letter from Headquarters Marine Corps, and I just told her, open it up and tell me what it says. I kind of knew what it was. And she said, I requested, or whatever the wording was, that to be present at, I think it was September the 28th of September 28th of 1950. So I went, I had to report.
And you reported to,
I reported to Camp Pendleton
that's in California.
in California, Oceanside, California. So, right away, you know, we went right into training, but the thing about it, I was carrying hot, I was in pretty good shape, you know. And, you know, been in the, you know what the deal was gonna be, but everybody at that time, MOS is your number that, what job you're is. In the Marine Corps, 0300 is the infantry spec number for what you're gonna do. So everybody in the Marine Corps, it's very different in the Army, is classified 0300, period.
Right.
Then you might become a truck driver or what have you, but basically, every man, till this day, you're classified in 0300. Well, anyhow,
I'm assuming that once you got there, that this time you were no longer a private. They had probably.
No, I was a corporal.
Okay.
And of course, we were going to go through training. And of course, I knew nothing about Korea. Hardly knew where it was at, tell you the truth. And so we were supposed to go through our training and whatnot. And like I say, I was in pretty good shape. But they were going to send us up to Big Bear, which is in Nevada, for cold weather training, and we did go up there, but we had all this gear on and whatnot, and it was hotter than all get out, you know. So and the Marine Corps was not prepared at that time for that kind of warfare. So got back down to Pendleton after the week or so, supposedly of cold weather training, and the situation in Korea at that time was a little bit tough.
I was going to say Busan almost collapsed, and
Well, this even after Busan, it was still very sticky wicky, and the decision was made by General MacArthur that the North Koreans were on the run, and General MacArthur wanted to go up into Manchuria and whatnot, which was not a very good decision. At our time, then the division commander was a General O.P. Smith, and he had been in the Marine Corps for a good number of years. It was his career, and he was the division commander. And could you excuse me?
Sure.
Is that going to bother that machine?
Hello?
Oh, Andy's got it.
Hello?
I don't think that's working, Andy.
No.
But anyhow, but you take the phone with you here, and if it rings again,
somebody wants to sell you something.
I hope not. But
The
anyhow,
only reason why my landline rings anymore.
let me get a drink of water here. You need something to drink?
I'm fine. So did they send you over to Korea?
Oh, yeah. So I was at Camp Pendleton, and we were still maybe had another 4 weeks of training. And one night, they called everybody out by name and said, you, pardon me, the people that are standing here, get your sea bags loaded, we're moving out tomorrow. And so we left, and it was in such haste. I thought we were going to board ship and all that. They flew us over.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so what we didn't know, that the Chinese
Had
had crossed over from Manchuria and attacked 1st Marine Division and our other Army divisions there, and to place where they crossed over was, what the heck is the name of that? Chosin Reservoir. And so they were in desperate need of troops. So I was considered the second draft. One draft had gone over first and joined Colonel Craig's brigade, and then my draft was the second draft, and I joined the 1st Marine Division that was already going up into North Korea to the reservoir. General Smith, and I wasn't there, understand, had a meeting with MacArthur and whatnot, and he says, this is not the time for us to go up there. We're not equipped to go up to that weather, and we don't want to start World War III by going into Manchuria, which the Chinese would think is an invasion. So I joined 7th Marines. I was in the 7th Marine Regiment. On, of all things, I can remember this. Bring back a lot of memories, but I joined the 7th Marines on the 10th of November, which is the Marine Corps birthday.
Okay.
You know.
But now the Chinese have not crossed the Yalu, have they?
Oh yeah.
Okay, they
Yeah, and the 1st Division, my division, 2 regiments, well 3 regiments really, the 7th, which is my regiment, the 5th, and the 11th Marines was an artillery outfit, were surrounded because they came over. I think the date might be, I'm not sure about the date, but it had to be somewhere around the 24th or 25th of January. And they crossed the Yalu. And of course, I was there. I was at a staging area called, what was it? Hagaroo. And it was more or less where the general was and all the big shots. And regular staging area. So I had joined the 7th Marines there, and they then had gone up north towards where our Yalu River, yeah. And when the Chinese intervened,
and of course it's freezing cold.
oh boy, we didn't have any thermometers, but we were not ready for this kind of warfare. I got a picture hanging on a wall there somewhere. Andy can get it. My buddy there that's on the couch, a picture. He's covered up. He was in the 7th Motor Transport. He was a truck driver, and he was with me. He just passed away last December. So anyhow, we were better equipped than some of the guys that are already there, because we had parkas that we got in the States, but it was not adequate for that kind of weather. They estimated it was the coldest winter in North Korea for I don't know how many years, and it was, they estimated 40 below zero. And I mean, that is the most desolate country. It's nothing but hills and, very little bit of timber. If it is, it's up on one of those big hills. And it was a disaster, as history records, you know. And with the weather, and I think the figure, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I know there was a lot of Chinese. You know, you hear that old story about Custer. Where in the hell did all those Indians come from? Well, that was the talk. Where did all these Chinese? But the pitiful thing about it, MacArthur and his guys were in China, or in Japan, and they were told that they were killing and taking some prisoners, and they were Chinese, and the word coming back from Japan was, you're wrong, it's not Chinese. And they were, you know. So it was estimated, and I found out later on in the years, that there was like 200,000 of them that crossed over from Manchuria. And they were coming from the mainland of China, walked all that distance. Well, they were in as bad shape as we were, because they had big old padded jackets and stuff, but their feet looked like tennis shoes. Their feet were frozen, everything they owned, they packed on their back. They took down artillery pieces, and some guy was carrying a wheel of one artillery piece, and the other guy had the other wheel. And oh man, I mean, those guys, I don't know how in the world they did it. But anyhow, you know the story then there, and so.
So you are one of the chosen frozen.
I am one of the chosen frozen, yeah. And so anyhow, it was a tough situation. There's no two ways about it. But there was a general in the army who was his name was General Amon, and he sent word to our commanding officer, General Smith, that he was going to send a helicopter to get him out.
Get the general out.
The general out, fly him to Japan or wherever, South Korea. And Smith, being the man he was, an old Marine from the old Corps, you know, says, I came in with these guys and I'll go out with them. Only as General Smith could tell General Amon, and that's exactly what he did. Everybody that wasn't dead or wounded, and the wounded, you know, put them on any conveyance that was running. That was another thing. All the fuel was frozen. If the fuel got frozen in a tank over the side of the thing about it, they get rid of it, and started on the trip down towards Ham Hung, which was a seaport there. And so it wasn't an orderly, I don't want to say retreat. Chesty Puller, who was the commanding officer of the 1st Marine Regiment, said, it's not retreat, it's a strategic withdrawal. So anyhow, we started down this road, the only road in and the only road out. And the dang Chinamans blew the bridge. No way out. The bridge was gone. So they called to Japan, and this is an odd story. Here I am in Pulaski County years and years later, but I guess I'm getting ahead of my story. Am I doing okay?
You're doing fine.
So the engineers called to Japan to get girders,
right,
to put over the crevasse, and so they came with an airplane. They're going to drop it with parachutes, and I don't know how heavy they were, but they were big pieces of steel. And the dang things, they missed their mark. It went over to the Chinese lines. And what is them Chinamen going to do with these big old girders, you know? But anyhow, years later, just maybe 10 years ago, on a Veterans Day, I worked out at a little place up here in St. Roberts, and I was coming out of having a workout that morning, and it was Veterans Day. And I see this guy out there in front of the place, and he's got a cap on World War II in Korea. So naturally you say, Happy Veterans Day, just kidding around. And he was a black man. So he came over to the truck where I was at and started talking stuff, you know. That he said, were you up north? I said, yeah. And he says, were you up at the reservoir? And I said, yeah. He says, my plane, and he was an enlisted man, and he was in the Quartermaster Corps. He says, we're the ones that dropped those girders for you to get over that crevasse. And I says, yeah, and you guys missed. They did. So they sent back and got 2 more girders from Japan, and they dropped in the right zone. And then our engineers made that bridge and whatnot under fire, and they were making an airfield too to land those DC-3s or whatever the heck they called them then, to take the wounded out. But the orders were, you know, if you were so badly wounded you couldn't walk, they would put you on anything that was running and whatnot, and the rest, if you had, superficial wounds or nothing that was life-threatening, say, you had to walk. And that included General Smith. Walked out of there, it took us 14 days, down to Hamnung, and they had ships out there, and went down there, loaded it up, and they took us to Busan, unloaded there, and we took trucks and went up to a little town called Mason, and had tents put up, and it looked like the Waldorf Astoria. They had straw on the floor of the tents, and boy, I mean, and hot chow, because in 14 days, hardly anybody was able to eat. Everything was frozen, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much,
I was going to say, my father-in-law was in Korea, and he said the one thing he hated more than anything else was cold cereal. He said every day you were on the line, that's what you ate, cold cereal.
Yeah, well, we didn't even get cold cereal. We had sea rations. Of course, they were frozen up there, that north,
Mm-hmm.
and if a truck was running, guys would throw the hood up, put the junk on there and let it warm up. But do you want funny stories too?
Please. What's humorous?
We get down to Hamhung. Now, it took us 14 days with very little food and no solid food to speak of, and you're scrounging, So we get down to Hamhung to go aboard ship, and I'm not exaggerating. Anybody that's still alive will remember this. There was a pile of these Tootsie Rolls, them things that, and had a guard on it, a Marine guard. And of course, when we see them Tootsie Rolls, we're going to fill up the pockets and start eating that stuff. And this guy said, "Oh no, I got to order this. Nobody touches this stuff." So somebody just got him aside and said, "Buddy, just take a walk, go get a smoke or something," whatever was said. But leave this pile of Tootsie Rolls here because we're going to eat it, And we did. And so then when we got aboard ship, the Navy cooks stayed up and they baked homemade bread, and we had bread and coffee, the first solid food. I know our fit was the first to get that, and boy, I mean to tell you, we were in high cotton, just with that bread and coffee, But that's one of the funny things, this clown going to
Guard the
Tootsie Rolls. But we got there to Mason and had the tents all set up, and let's see, we got there maybe about, I'm saying 2 or 3 days before Christmas. And of course, my best buddy, I didn't know if he made it out, So Christmas Eve, 1950, and we were at Mason, and they said, any Catholic boys that want to go to Mass, we're going to have a Mass over such and such an area at midnight. So I go over there was a few Catholic boys in my platoon, and we went over there at midnight Mass, and at communion, I see this guy coming back from receiving communion, and he had a big old mustache. And I'm saying to myself, boy, that looks like Bob. And as he came by me, I give him a punch. I says, Bob, and it was him. I said, God, thank you, he's alive. And so after Mass, we went outside the tent, and he was down the road a couple miles, I guess, at a little blowed out schoolhouse or something like that, and that's where they were headquarters. And I said, well, Bob, I'm going to be on guard duty, because we had civilians coming through, and you couldn't tell them from North Koreans or Chinamans and whatnot, so you had to frisk them all and check them out and whatnot. And so he said, well, I got 2 beers and 2 cigars. So I went down, after I got off guard duty on Christmas Day, down to his place, and we drank the beers and the cigars. They were so old they unraveled, you couldn't hardly light them. best Christmas I ever had because he was alive, and I saw him one other time during the war, and then I never saw him again until later on, you know. And Annie, are you there, Ann? Could you get that picture of Bob hanging on the wall here of me? To give you some idea of who I'm talking about. You know, it's the top one there?
Yes, no person.
Yeah. This is Bob. That's Christmas Day. Yeah. Well, here. That's Bob, and that's I guess his truck that he drove and myself, and that's the gear. A pretty good picture of the gear right there. What we wore, and that was Christmas Day, 1950. And Bob just died a year ago in December. My best friend, and we were friends from then on, naturally. So, but you can see on that picture the shoes that we had, or at least I had on, was they called them what the heck did they call them? Shoe packs. And it was leather on the top and rubber on the bottom, and they were no good. Most guys that got frozen feet got them because of those damn things, you know. Shoe packs. Because your feet would sweat and then freeze, you know. And it was a bad piece of equipment.
So how long were you at this tent city?
The day after Christmas, we were out in the field and waiting for guys to come back from the hospital. They had a big naval hospital in Yokosuka. And if it was serious injuries, head wounds or things of that nature, they went to Yokosuka. Well, they had, a doctor had to examine the guy and say, you go here, you go there. But they also had in Busan docked was the USS Repose, which was a hospital ship. So if you had, they did amputations and surgeries there. It was a beautiful ship, well equipped. And it was a vintage hospital ship from World War II, And so we stayed there at Mason, and every day we're in the field waiting for guys to come back from the hospital, because the division, when it came, or the company, my company, Able Company, when it came out of the north down to Ham Hung, and we went into Mason, when we had roll call, there was only 29 out of a company of 240. So, but some of them come trickling back after they had gone to the hospital and got fixed up and whatnot. But even though we were under strength, the Marine Corps don't fool around. You're back out in the field snooping and pooping in the weeds, So we stayed there at Mason, I'm going to say 3 weeks, maybe a month, and trying to get our ranks filled up. And then we moved by truck to the west part of Korea, in South Korea. We were still below the 38th, to a town called Pohang. And our job then now was, even at that point, we were still under strength, but we still could get in the field. So they had a lot of North Koreans that had been dispersed or defected, and they could live off the land because you couldn't tell the difference between them and anybody else, and they put on we called them white sheet, and they were part of the populace. So we chased them buggers around in the over at Pohang, and they were in small groups, really hard. You'd climb all day up one of them hills and maybe kill 5 of them, And so we did that, I guess a month. And then we came back to Pohang, and then got put into the East Central Front, and that's where we stayed, right there in the center. because now the Chinese are come down into South Korea and whatnot, so we went back and forth on the 38th and all, you know, and and I remember, am I doing okay?
You're doing great.
I mean, I get off, my
That's fine.
daughter tells me I get gassing too much, but after we got on the Central Front there, they Chinese combined with North Koreans that were there had a lot of artillery pieces. So I can remember we had a staging area there, and everybody came out, and this major, he was a major, he says, it is the wishes of the headquarters that the 7th Marines seek out, overrun, and destroy all artillery pieces in this area. So that's what we did there for, quite some time there, finding these people, and they were, you know, they're hidden in these caves and stuff like that. And then it was around Easter time, and the Chinese, I guess that would have been now 51, had a spring offensive. And I can remember it was, I'm sitting up on this hill, and it started snowing like, I guess it was March or something. By then, I don't know exactly what date it was, but I remember it was snowing, oh boy, big time. And it was Easter, it was either Easter Day or the night before, and I'm sitting on this hill on guard duty, and I'm thinking, oh, here we are, it's Easter, and they're having a spring offensive. Well, back then, they had what they called the ROKs, R-O-Ks, Republic of Korean Soldiers. Most of them were conscripts.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time a shot rang out, them buggers run. So we're on this hill on Easter, snowing, and that's when the Chinese started their spring offensive. And the 1st Cavalry was an Army unit that was on line with us. On the right flank was a Chesty Puller, who's a colonel, an old Marine, his 1st Marines there, and they broke through. The ROKs broke their lines, they ran out.
The Chinese went through that area.
Right. And of interest to a Missouri boy, especially somebody in St. Louis, that night, the 1st Cal was there, and Tom Lombardo was a West Point graduate from St. Louis, Solden High School, the quarterback on the football team. What year it was, I can't remember. And he was there with his outfit, and he got killed that night because the word came back to us. Tom Lombardo, and anybody that followed football knew the name of Tom Lombardo. He was All-American. He got killed. Well, Chesty Puller's outfit was in reserve, back maybe 2 or 3 miles behind the line, and they were on reserve, like I say, and they had to get out of reserve and go back up and fill that gap. They had taken so many casualties that they were robbing some other companies to put guys over there to help them, you know, they're in trouble. So they picked so many guys out of a platoon because we were at full strength, you know. We had very few guys in the hospital or dead and whatnot. So I don't know how many guys from my platoon went over there to help Puller and his 1st Marines, who had taken very heavy casualties. And Chesty Puller, now I did not see this is what I've been told, but he was there. He was a kind of commanding officer. He wasn't in the rear. He was right up front, and he had the rifle and all that kind of stuff, you know. He was a tough old bugger. He says, here's the line. Anybody crosses this line, shoot him. Well, there wasn't no Marines going to cross, but these South Korean ROKs, if they crossed the line, we had orders to shoot them, you know. So we held the line and whatnot, and things got to be a little bit better. But they came over, it was spring, and then a lot of rain then, and it was, they had to do a lot of airdropping of supplies and gasoline and all that kind of crap. But anyhow, am I getting too windy?
No, no.
So, is there any more questions, or should I?
Give me out of Korea.
Okay, and well, so it was back and forth. We take ground, and then you get some orders from Japan, move back, and God knows how many times we crossed the 38th. So then there was peace talks, and anybody with their right mind is saying, "Oh, I hope the heck they get something done so we can get done with this damn craziness, get home." And so they had the peace talk. So we went back to the 38th, dug in, and every day you had to go on patrol, and we were having some skirmishes, but we weren't moving. You just go back to your line, and we had bunkers built and cut trees down, all that kind of stuff, and pretty good, getting some hot chow. And so, then the summer came and what have you.
Well, this would be the summer of 51.
Be the summer of 51, yes. And then I stayed there then doing that, and we never moved. Patrols, getting in a few firefights, got a lot of mortar fire, mostly, not artillery, but mortar fires, just harassing stuff, you had to keep on your toes and whatnot. And we took some casualties, but not near like we did before. And so pretty much sat there until they were having the armistice talks and all kind of stuff, but guys were still getting shot and dying while they were talking. And so I was there for Christmas, the second Christmas, and then I think it was either the latter part of December or the first part of January that I had enough time, and they wanted to start. Troops were coming in from the States now, trained, fresh, and the reserves were being,
So you were like in World War II, you would accumulate points.
Well, it wasn't so much points, but they had enough. They were building up the divisions, and the enlistments were pretty good or whatnot. I don't think they had a draft on that. I'm not sure about that. But anyhow, I was relieved, and I went back, to San Diego. We went aboard ship there in South Korea at Busan, and then made the trip, the northern route of the Pacific to San Diego. And I was there longer than I wanted to be because they had worms so bad over there. Guys inhale that dust and dirt and food and whatnot. Damned if I didn't end up with the worms. Well, you figure you'd get the pills that they give you and test it, and I could not get rid of it. So I spent about 3 weeks maybe there at San Diego to get rid of them worms, and then I came home. So.
And that would have been in 53 from?
52.
52.
Yeah. And then I was.
You were mustered out?
Yeah.
Again,
yeah. And,
I'm assuming this time you didn't sign up for the reserves.
Well, no, I didn't, but I would have. That's the thing, I think, that I get peeved more or less because I'm still a recruiter. Every kid that's been down here at Kilos from Elias High School, I said, what are you going to do after high school, Because I'm a recruiter. If you see somebody that you think can make it, through the training the Marine Corps offers you, and only one guy, and he was in Maggie's class that I gave a big book to because he says, as soon as I get out of, I want to do it now, but my mom and dad said, no, you go get your college. You probably had him in class. Nice kid. And he said, well, I want to go in the Marine Corps right now. I like to fell over. That's the first kid that I heard wanted to go in the Marine Corps. And so anyhow, I said, look, you can go to school, you want to go to school, get a degree, and if you still feel that way, you can go in as an officer with that education. send you to Quantico and go through platoon leader's class, and you become a second lieutenant. You know, if you want to go into the Marine Corps, and that's what he's doing. He's going to Lincoln right now, as I understand. Nice kid, but that's what he want to do, and the only one. And that's the thing that kind of peeves you, because when I was in high school, when Pearl Harbor took place, the next day, that was on a Sunday, there were guys lined up on that sidewalk. You know, you thought it was a chow line or something to enlist.
Right.
Because they were so pissed at them damn Japs for putting all them ships down in Hawaii and what have you. And the whole scene changed here in the U.S. during World War II. Everybody got into the the women came got rid of the aprons and went into the war plants and whatnot, because we were in bad shape. It's a wonder we won the war, in World War II. And what have you, but...
So what did you do after service? After you got out in '52, what was...
Well, I had I was a junior at Missouri when I had a report to Pendleton, and so I came from a single parent home, and I needed to get a job and make some money because take care of my mother, So I was studying agriculture at Columbia in animal husbandry, they called it back in them days. So I came out and took a little bit of a week or two to just collect yourself a little bit, because you go from one extreme into another. It's like the curtain drop, and you go from all that nonsense, and then you're back here in the civilian world. So and then I got a job. Sort of in my line with Armour and Company over in East St. Louis in the cattle division and what have you. But an interesting story, today I don't know what they call it, these guys coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan have these emotional issues. Well, we called it back in those days combat fatigue. But it was lack of sleep and all the other stuff that goes with it, and all the bad stuff that happens, And I meet this guy aboard ship, which I didn't know, and Frank, what the heck was Frank's last name? Well, he lived in Florissant, Missouri, and his uncle and aunt were truck farmers in Florissant, Missouri. And we got talking, and he told me he was from Florissant and whatnot, so after a couple of weeks, I went out to visit Frank, and his uncle was elderly and had arthritis so bad, and you know what truck farms are like, I'm sure, a lot of hard work. So I knew they needed the help, and I enjoyed Frank's company, so I would go out there on weekends and help him as a gardener, working with the help, He had a lot of black help at that time, and he had a big rhubarb patch and stuff like that, and I started going out there, and that was my therapy, because I kept my hands busy, and when your hands are busy, your noggin up here gets rid of all the bad stuff that you should be getting rid of, and I never had this, whatever the heck they term it now, having to have a dog companion or going to some psychiatrist or something like that. You just worked and got over it, And that's all they did after World War II. You're just so glad to get out of that mess,
So are there things you remember about either your service in China or your service in Korea? Are there things that you'll remember forever and ever? Are there things that kind of stand out, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that stand out. Boys are boys. You always kidding one another, goofing around, because at that time, guys in my platoon were 17. Can you imagine 17 years old, and 18? And I was old because I had been in before and got discharged, and then the reserves called me back, and I was 22. I was an old man because these kids were all 17, 18 years old. and kids, you know, grab-assing as we called it, you know, and fooling around and whatnot. And you have those memories of those guys, but the one guy that always stands out, do you want kind of funny stories?
Sure.
We had a guy, believe this or not, I don't know if he's still alive. His name was Lippincott, and he was from New Jersey. And Lippincott, our platoon leader, was the name of Jack Bowes, and he was an old enlisted guy from way back in the time of the Marine Corps, maybe right after or during the Depression, I don't know. And he was a gunny sergeant up until the time of Korea started, and they commissioned him as a lieutenant, as a platoon leader. And every platoon has one officer. They call them platoon leaders. So Mr. Bowes, we call in the Navy and Marine Corps, they call an officer, a first or a second lieutenant, Mr. And Mr. Bowes was our platoon leader and a real good Marine. And we had this guy, Lippincott, that was in my squad in the 3rd platoon. And the Chinese were equipped with burp guns. And it was 30 caliber weapon, but it had a drum on it, and it carried, I think, 50 rounds or more, but it had a lot of firepower, but it had no range. It was an up-close weapon, and they all carried them. So anyhow, Lippincott was in my squad, and he got hit right between the eyes. I mean, it was just like you would make an X there. And he got hit there and went down. Well, when you know that a guy's got a headshot, you figure he's dead. But he wasn't. Anyhow, is this the kind of story you want to hear?
Whatever you want.
Anyhow, Lippincott, I found out later on, after many weeks, because I never saw him again. They took him off the hill, never saw him again, just figured he's gone. And so we're at Pohang, getting replacements in and guys coming back from Yokosuka. And we were out there and watching who's getting off the trucks and stuff. And the guys, one of the guys from the company says, you know, that guy, they're getting off that truck, looks like Lippincott. I said, you're kidding me? No. I could tell by his walking, it was a real muddy, it had a lot of rain, it was mud and whatnot. Here comes this guy. And you could always tell a guy coming back from Yokosuka because they had Army gear on. They had new fatigues on that were from the Army, and they weren't Marine issue like that. That's my old jacket that I wore. But anyhow, sure enough, it's Lippincott. Well, everybody's surprised, and he's, yeah. He says, I was eating sukiyaki and playing with all the Japanese gals while you guys are out here in the slop, you know. He made it, but the cartridge, the bullet, was a burp gun, and the velocity of the thing had diminished, you know. Mm-hmm. And when it struck him, it just cracked his skull, but didn't go into his brain or anything like that. And he, of course, had a little eye problem and what happened. But other than that, they patched him up, and he joined the platoon. But there's another sequel to that if you want to hear it. So his feet were bad from up at the Chosen, but he's still a Marine. He's going to stay there till the last chicken is hatched and what have you, and didn't want to leave his buddies. That's what it's all about. You don't want to leave your buddies. Anyhow, he would always complain, "Boy, golly, tomorrow I'm going to turn myself in." I says, "Lip, go ahead. You deserve it. Your feet are bothering you. Turn yourself in, and you get home." And he never did it. So one day, and it was weather, cold, snowing and whatnot, and they asked for 2 guys out of every squad to go to battalion, and battalion usually was down the hill a ways, and you could get water. and they had those 5-gallon